Immortality is not endless survival. Bodies vanish. Breath ends. But meaning persists. Iqbal reminds us, the self does not live forever by lasting longer, but by becoming impossible to erase. For Iqbal, immortality is not a future reward. It is present responsibility. The self becomes immortal when its actions carry weight beyond time, beyond memory, and continue acting after the voice falls silent. Today, we continue our journey through Asrar Khudi, Allama Iqbal's philosophy of the self. This is episode 49. Immortality, in Iqbal's vision, is not endless survival. It is enduring significance. Not the continuation of the body, but the persistence of the self's force within the fabric of reality. The self learns that immortality is not granted automatically. It is earned. Earned through strength. Earned through character. Earned through action that carries meaning beyond the moment. The self understands that what dissolves with time was never fully real. Only what carries inner weight resists disappearance. The self realizes that the self becomes immortal by refusing insignificance. Insignificance accepts erasure. Meaning resists it. The self sees that immortality begins now, not after death. Now, in the quality of intention with which life is lived. The self learns that actions infused with depth do not vanish. They echo. Echoes shape memory. Memory shapes history. The self understands that immortality is not memory alone. Memory fades. Force remains. Force continues acting through what has been set in motion. The self realizes that the self becomes immortal when it becomes a cause. Causes persist. Effects ripple forward long after the origin is unseen. The self sees that a self without direction leaves no trace. Direction gives action trajectory. Trajectory carries influence. The self learns that immortality is not loud. It is durable. Durability outlasts attention. Attention fades quickly. The self understands that immortality requires unity. A fragmented self scatters energy. Unified energy creates lasting impact. The self realizes that immortality is not ego-preserved. Ego decays. What endures is contribution aligned with truth. The self sees that immortality demands responsibility. What the self creates continues acting. Action released cannot be withdrawn. The self learns that immortality is built through consistency. Isolated greatness fades. Sustained integrity endures. The self understands that the immortal self does not seek escape from time. It enters time fully and leaves it transformed. The self realizes that immortality is not miracle. It is consequence. Consequence accumulated through conscious living. The self sees that the self becomes immortal when it stops asking, "How long will I live?" and begins asking, "What will live through me?" The self learns that immortality resists fear of death. Fear shortens vision. Vision extended transcends fear. The self understands that immortality is not possession. It is transmission. Transmission of strength. Transmission of meaning. Transmission of courage. The self realizes that the self becomes immortal when its values outlive its voice. Voice fades. Values continue speaking. Through action, the self sees that immortality does not belong to the passive. Passivity leaves no imprint. Imprint defines persistence. The self learns that immortality requires sacrifice. Sacrifice accepted binds the self to something greater than comfort. The self understands that immortality is not escape from responsibility. It is responsibility carried beyond the self. The self realizes that immortality begins when the self lives as though its actions matter eternally. The self begins to understand that immortality is not permanence of form, but permanence of influence. Form dissolves. Influence migrates from one life into many lives. The self realizes that immortality grows where intention becomes action. Intention alone fades. Action anchored in conviction creates continuity. The self understands that immortality does not require recognition. Recognition is temporary. Truth lived endures without applause. The self sees that the immortal self does not cling to survival. Clinging weakens force. Force released moves freely through time. The self learns that immortality demands courage to live decisively. Indecision leaves no trace. Decision shapes trajectory. The self understands that immortality is not an idea. It is a pattern of action, repeated with integrity. The self realizes that what is repeated consciously carves permanence. Repetition without awareness decays. Repetition with meaning endures. The self sees that immortality arises when the self aligns with principles larger than itself. Alignment expands impact. Impact transcends duration. The self learns that immortality requires unity of life. Life fragmented into roles loses coherence. Coherence preserves influence. The self understands that immortality is not speed. Speed burns out. Depth remains. The self realizes that immortality belongs to the self that creates continuity. Continuity between thought and action. Continuity between values and behavior. Continuity between vision and sacrifice. The self sees that immortality grows from responsibility. Responsibility accepted anchors the self in consequence. Consequence sustained creates weight. The self learns that immortality does not erase failure. Failure instructs. Instruction strengthens wisdom. Wisdom transmitted outlives the self. The self understands that immortality is not control. Control ends at the self. Influence continues beyond it. The self realizes that immortality requires patience. What endures is not rushed. Time tests sincerity. The self sees that immortality resists comfort. Comfort seeks ease. Immortality seeks significance. The self learns that immortality is built quietly. Quiet effort compounds. Compound effort reshapes destiny. The self understands that immortality is not domination. Domination provokes resistance. Influence invites continuation. The self realizes that the immortal self does not live for memory. It lives for meaning. Meaning generates memory naturally. The self sees that immortality is preserved through example. Example embodied outlives instruction. The self learns that immortality depends on ethical consistency. Consistency strengthens trust. Trust carries legacy. The self understands that immortality requires humility. Humility keeps purpose clean. Clean purpose endures. The self realizes that immortality is not escape from death. It is mastery of life. Life mastered transcends mortality. The self sees that immortality begins when the self lives, as though every choice carries future weight. There comes a moment when the self understands that immortality is not length of existence, but density of meaning. A shallow life fades quickly. A dense life resists erasure. The self realizes that what survives time is not the body, but the force of intention, released through action. The self understands that immortality is not a future reward. It is a present responsibility to live in a way that refuses insignificance. The self sees that the immortal self does not fear disappearance. Fear weakens vision. Vision extended dissolves fear. The self learns that immortality demands seriousness. Not heaviness, but seriousness of purpose. Purpose embraced organizes life. The self understands that immortality grows when the self becomes a standard of integrity, a standard of courage, a standard of truth. The self realizes that the immortal self does not dissolve into history. It shapes it. Shaping requires strength. Strength refined becomes authority. The self sees that immortality is continuity of will. Will sustained moves beyond individual lifespan. The self learns that immortality resists triviality. Triviality wastes energy. Energy conserved builds depth. The self understands that immortality requires sacrifice. Without guarantee, guarantee belongs to repetition. Immortality belongs to faith lived. The self realizes that immortality is not personal glory. Glory fades. Service endures. The self sees that the immortal self is not remembered for words alone. Words inspire briefly. Example instructs permanently. The self learns that immortality grows where courage meets consistency. Courage without consistency burns out. Consistency without courage stagnates. Together, they endure. The self understands that immortality demands coherence. Coherence between belief and action. Coherence strengthens influence. The self realizes that immortality is not accidental. It is constructed through conscious choice. Choice repeated becomes character. Character becomes destiny. The self sees that immortality does not remove limitation. It uses limitation to carve significance. Significance resists decay. The self learns that immortality is transmission. Transmission of strength. Transmission of meaning. Transmission of awakened selfhood. The self understands that immortality requires humility before time. Time tests sincerity. Sincerity withstands time. The self realizes that the immortal self does not seek survival. It seeks contribution. Contribution outlives survival. The self sees that immortality is not escape from death. It is victory over insignificance. The self learns that immortality is the self, becoming a force among forces. A force that continues acting, even when unseen. And finally, the self understands immortality is not endless breath. It is enduring meaning. And the self that lives meaningfully never truly disappears.